Hello, everyone, and welcome to What Was the Point with Tim Campbell. I'll hand over to Tim in a second, but Tim has previously designed and run Shot Heard Around the Universe. He's been a former secretary of Penine MegaGames here in the UK, and he's run a couple of versions of Urban Nightmare. One of them being the Wide Area Network mega game, which was huge across 6 sites. So Tim's got quite a bit of experience as a player and a designer and game runner. So he's going to talk to you today about experiences after running a mega game. So over to you, Tim.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. So I wanted to take a bit of time today to talk about something that I've had conversations about after games with various designers. And I've referred to it in this talk as designer drop. And it's essentially that feeling of, why did I bother doing this after a game? And so just a little bit on my background before I start. Chris has given my mega gaming introduction. I've been mega gaming since 2012, and I'm also in both of these Shut Up and Sit Down videos, which is my other mega game claim to fame. So I've been mega gaming for a good while, and I've done various bits. What I'm not is any kind of psychologist. So this is very much a layman's take on it based on my personal experience and experience talking to other designers that I know have felt similarly about it. So just to set the scene a little bit on what is it and what do I mean, I'd like to talk about the very first game that I ran. So this was way back in April 2016, and this is Jim Wallman's Urban Nightmare, pretty much straight out of the box as he sold it. It was about 30 players at a church hall in Leeds, and while I'd been to various games at that point, it was my first time actually running one, which is a whole different kettle of fish. And the game itself went pretty well. Feedback was good. The day went pretty smoothly. We had the occasional hiccup with it being a closed map. There's always issues with transmitting information between the map and the players. Hospital may or not have got hit by a helicopter gunship. We went back and forth on that point a few times. But this is all minor stuff. The players had fun. There was a good vibe in the pub afterwards. And I know that they had fun because we scored on enjoyment on our feedback forms, 1 being highest, 4 being lowest. And I got an average score of 1.32, which is very comparable to other games of a similar size that we ran at the time. So to all intents and purposes, it was a good game that ran well. Players came and had fun and it all worked. And I was so unhappy after that game with how it had gone that the whole game went home in a black duffel bag, and I never unpacked that bag. The whole bag went in the bin without ever being unpacked because I was so distraught with how badly it had gone in my head. And looking at it now with hindsight and a lot more experience, I can recognize that was just a huge overreaction. But I completely fixated on the parts that had gone wrong and on the very minor tweaks that I'd made to the game to fix certain perceived issues that I had, which hadn't worked as well. So a bit of a disproportionate reaction, but having talked to a few other designers, not a unique one. So designer drop, what do I mean by it? That's the capsule definition that I've come up with so far. So a feeling of profound sadness or depression after your game is run successfully or not. And that's a point that I want to stress. This is not about running a game, it going poorly, and you feeling bad about it. That's quite understandable in those circumstances. This is something that hits me and others I've spoken to pretty much regardless of how the game went. It's not a mega games issue. This happens to be where I'm most familiar with it, but reading around, you'll find the same phenomenon essentially under various different names. So project management recognizes it. It's quite prominent in discussions around theatre. So post-performance blues, post-show blues, that kind of phrasing. And again, it's similarly that the big thing that you've poured your life into is now over. And there's perhaps not an appreciation from people that haven't done it as to just how much time goes into a game. I once costed it up looking at the eternal question of, can you actually make any money from mega games? And if you see the headline figure about how much money you get paid on the day, say 30 players, 30 quid a head, 900 quid, doesn't look like a bad rate, but there's literally hundreds of hours goes into a game. And some of it's the fun stuff about writing briefings, about designing mechanics. Then there's testing them, finding out all your mechanics don't work, reworking the mechanics. And then there's all the admin, just getting people booked in, advertising your game, getting signups, arranging the hall, cutting out all your counters, all of that kind of stuff. And my experience certainly has been that it takes over your life completely and absolutely takes over your life for at least 2 or 3 months beforehand as you go into the final dive towards go day. And then suddenly you do it and that's it. You've got the feedback forms to look at and that's it. The whole process is over. And it's that sudden absence, I think, which is the key trigger behind why it hits me as it does. And it's worth stressing as well, this isn't universal. It's not just my experience, as I'll show you in a moment. But Becky, for instance, we co-designed pretty much all of the games that either one of us has run. And she doesn't get it. She gets much more of a buzz from running the events and comes out of them on a massive high. I speculate that's something to do with where you sit extrovert to introvert, but not enough data on that one. So quotes from a few of the names you might recognize, just to reassure you that it's not just me. And if you do recognize this, it's not just you. One that we all know there, some of you may just have come from his talk, but Jim Wallman, I feel a sense of relief after it's over every time. And on some level, when I spoke to Jim before this talk, that came as a little bit of a surprise to me because I sort of thought that, it'd all be old hat to Jim now, with him having run literally hundreds of games. But as he says there, still hits that it's over and the stress is gone and you don't have to worry about it anymore. Zane, for those of you who don't recognize the name, that's the designer of Aftermath, also running at this con. The next day there's a void, and that's a sentiment that I really resonate with. I've been working so hard on this for so long and everything's done and gone. And what do I do with myself now? And then Alex Beck of Monsterville Mansion, one of my all-time favorites, Crisis in Elysium, and various others. No matter how well it goes, there is a crash. And again, that's the point I want to emphasize. It's not about your game went badly and you feel bad about that. It's about that kind of shock to the system of it suddenly being over, regardless of how it went. So having talked a lot about what it is and what it might look like to you, what can you do about it? And this is definitely something that I've got better with myself over time. And I've recognized patterns in myself about how I react to this. And these are some of the coping strategies that I've come up with and that I've compared notes with on other designers that I know feel similarly to help me kind of smooth it out and come away from the whole thing feeling more positive. And the first one is just be aware. That sounds really basic, but knowing is half the battle. Once you're aware that this is a thing that can hit, that helps a lot with managing it, because when I feel so dire the next day, I know that it is that designer drop, that it's something that I don't enjoy it, but I recognize it. And it helps me remember that this is just a reaction to the ending rather than my game is terrible and I'm the worst designer ever and I should never be let near cards or dice ever again. So that's something that I find really helpful, just being aware that this is something that may hit you there. Looking after the basics. From experience, when you're running a mega game, as I said, it takes over your life and you're thinking all the time about whether that mechanic's quite right and you need to get these counters printed and, oh God, someone's dropped out again and I need to sign someone else up for it. And it's actually surprisingly easy to lose track of things like eating, drinking, and sleeping, which sounds ridiculous, but it's so easily done. And particularly as well on the game day, it's so easy to rock up and get to the game and be flitting around as game control, spinning plates, keeping everything going, reassure that player that's struggling, make a quick patch to that mechanic that's not quite right, improvise a counter here, whatever it is. And realize you got to the end of the day and you haven't drunk any water or had anything to eat all day. And unsurprisingly, that does not support you in feeling well and happy afterwards. And I'm fortunate in that because Becky and I co-design pretty much all the games we've done, it means that whoever's not lead on it can sort of take lead in, shoving a sandwich into their hands and making them go to bed and so on and so forth. But where I say this means planning, while I don't always live up to this, if you can aim to have the game done, as in you could walk out of the door ready to go tomorrow, a week before the game, you give yourself an awful lot of room there for those last minute bits that you've inevitably forgotten about. And just trying to be that bit more organized in the run up to the game will support you in looking after those physical basics, and that'll help you feel a lot better. Self-talk before and after. I find it very useful to remind myself that the bit that I'm worrying about was not the game. And when I spoke about Urban Nightmare at the beginning, I said I fixated on the bits that went poorly, and I can still reel off 6 years down the line that story about the hospital, which may or may not have got hit by a missile. It's easy to fixate on those and easy to overlook all of the good stuff that's happening around you. So both in the pub afterwards and in the days thereafter and at the game, take the time to consciously note and enjoy the bits that are going well. When you see two players huddled in a corner, plotting away furiously, really engaged with the world that you've created, when you see the flurry of movement that goes through the room when some particular bit of news gets out about how some situation has developed, and seeing that burst through the room and all the people running to tell someone else who runs to tell someone else, take a minute and consciously enjoy those moments, because it's your game that did that. And it's not fair to yourself if you beat yourself up about the bits that don't go well while not also basking in the good stuff, essentially. And on the topic of bits that didn't go well, stay off the feedback. Most game groups that I've been to do feedback forms in some format or another, whether it's a physical bit of paper, whether it's an email, but there's an opportunity there for players to express what they didn't enjoy and normally score them on whatever scale your local group uses. That's invaluable, and you absolutely should do feedback, and you absolutely should review feedback, but you don't have to do it right away. There's a temptation to try and fill that hole, because as I said before, the game's ended. There's nothing for you to react with. The only thing you've got is the feedback forms, but you're not necessarily in the best place to get that kind of feedback. Players should feel free to tell you on the feedback form, this mechanic didn't really work and my role was a bit naff. And it's right and good that they do that, but you don't necessarily need to take that straight away. And I would really encourage every designer to give themselves a week off, particularly the next day. Just look after yourself. Do something that's fun and easy for you. And precisely what that means for you is going to vary. Maybe you'd want to go for a walk. Maybe you want to go and watch a movie. Maybe you want to go and see your family and talk about something that's not the mega game. Maybe you just want to curl up on the sofa and watch Netflix all day. It doesn't really matter as long as it's comfort, essentially, whatever you want to do, because you've poured so much into this. It's inevitably a big emotional release on the day. Spoil yourself a bit thereafter. Strongly recommend it. And then finally, share the load. Again, I find co-designing with Becky absolutely invaluable, because being able to hand off tasks to someone, being able to talk about what do you think about this idea, being able to vent about a player that's being difficult. Probably they're not being difficult. I'm just getting stressed. But sharing that load as widely as possible is immensely helpful. And what that looks like for you varies depending on your individual circumstances. If you've got a partner you can vent to, great. If you are running with a group that can offer some support to you, and again, this varies depending on your local situation, but if you've got a group that can do the admin work of signing up players, sending them where they need to go, all that kind of thing, that's great. Hand it off to them. You concentrate on designing and getting the game working. On the day, hand out as much as you can to your control team. You as game control, ideally, should have no duties. because it leaves you totally free to react and pack and fix bits where you might need to. And you'll always find something to do. I find it very hard to let go. But try and write yourself out as much as possible. But even if you're in, as I know some of the international guys are in a situation where you are your network and it's you running games and you are doing it as a one-man band and you've got the control team, but you haven't got anything beyond that, the one thing that I would really, really encourage is handing off the feedback forms. Because if you look at the feedback forms at the raw data, it's constantly chasing highs and lows. You know, this one said they really liked it. Oh, I'm the best designer ever. Yes. Oh no, this one says I'm terrible. I'm the worst designer ever. And you just push yourself through that roller coaster completely pointlessly, because feedback in aggregate is valuable. One person's feedback is of much more limited value. If they didn't like it, is it because of the role's bad? Have they just turned up a bit grumpy? Is it just that it was a perfectly fine role, but it's not to their taste? You get much more valuable data out of the aggregated feedback, and turning it from the raw forms into the aggregate requires no mega game knowledge whatsoever. Hand it off to a mate or a family member who is unconnected as just a basic data entry task and bribe them with some beer or whatever it is you need to do. But the point is to get you away from the raw forms and into the aggregate data. What's your overall enjoyment score? If you got 5 bits of feedback saying this role's a bit naff, it probably is a bit naff, and that's something for you to fix down the line. But that's much more valuable than one person saying you're rubbish and I don't like it. So I talked a lot there about what can you as a designer do. I just want to flip it around a bit now and talk about what can we do about it, because very few of us spend all our mega game time designing and running games. Mostly we go to them. So in that case, what can you do as an attendee to help out designers that might potentially be suffering with this? And the first point is a mirror of what it is for the designers. Be aware. Just be aware that even though you thought that was a great game and you've really enjoyed it, the designer might not be seeing it that way yet. And just be aware of that. And in particular, if you thought that your role wasn't brilliant, it's not the best game you've been to, well, that's unfortunate, because you probably paid 30 quid, you probably traveled, you've probably given up a day of your life to go to this, and maybe it wasn't great. Well, that designer's just put hundreds of hours into running this. And again, it's fine to tell them what did and didn't work, but just think about where you do it. The feedback form is good. Accosting them in the pub afterwards is probably not good. And be kind in delivering it. Sort of keys to the point I said before about the potential state of the designer and the work that they've put into it. And be aware of your own mood also. You know, you didn't think that was very good. Well, why is that? A lot of the stuff about getting sleep and food and so on and so forth also applies to players. You know, just be kind in the feedback that you're giving. And pub post-mortems, just be a bit careful with them. Mea culpa, I am very guilty of this. If you've been to a few mega games, particularly if you've designed and controlled, you will love sitting down dissecting mega games about, oh, I thought that worked really well, that didn't really work, I would have done this differently. It's part of the joy of it. I'm not going to say don't do it, but just be aware again, because even if you're not talking to the designer, if you sat in the pub, those conversations tend to kind of flow around the room. And so if you are being critical about it, just be aware of who's around you. You know, is the designer going to overhear you? Is the designer going to feel obliged to come in and talk about it? And again, I want to emphasize it's not about not criticizing designers, because it's absolutely right that we look at what does and doesn't work and give that constructive feedback so that we can get better games out of it. But there's an element of timing to it about doesn't necessarily have to be dealt with in the moment there and then. And so there's one sort of particular truce that I'd like to propose, which, as I said on the previous slide, I don't think designers should look at the forms for at least a week, and I don't think designers should aggregate their own raw data. And the truce that I'd like to see is basically that players can be constructive, but as harsh as feels appropriate on the feedback forms, and, you know, lay out what did and didn't work and give the designer that feedback, but try and keep it to the forms. When you're in the pub thereafter, just look after your designer a little bit. And it was interesting talking to the guys that I spoke to get the quotes for this. There was a difference in opinion about what they'd actually like in terms of interaction from the players in the pub afterwards. And so there's no one size fits all here. But it's just to be aware of them. Some of them are going to want to talk through what didn't to some degree. Some of them aren't going to go, and that's fine. You should not feel obliged in any way as a designer to go to the pub afterward. You've done your bit in doing the game. Some of them are just going to pop up and show their face and then leave, and that's equally fine. So keep your formal feedback constructive, and maybe just temper it a little bit when you're in the pub with them thereafter. So what if it was a mess? We don't like it, but it happens. What if you've gone to all that effort, you've put your hundreds of hours in, you've run your game, and it didn't work? Well, that is going to suck. There's not going to be any way really to make you feel much better about it. But there is a few bits that I can suggest. So first of all, look for the diamonds. I have been to some woeful mega games, and I won't name names, but some that I've just really not enjoyed at all. I don't think I've ever been to any game anywhere where I couldn't see someone in the room somewhere that was having fun doing a thing. And there's always somebody having fun. And so even if your game was a complete turkey, you still created that experience for that person. And this kind of speaks to the self-talk point that I made earlier about enjoying the good moments. That's still true, even if your game didn't work. You still created a positive experience for those people. That mechanic was really nifty, even if the rest of the game didn't work. So look for the diamonds in the rough and just let yourself enjoy them. Don't try and fix it right afterwards. Again, sort of counterpart to not looking at the feedback for a week. There'll be a temptation for you to immediately redesign the whole thing and make it work. And it's not to say you can't run a game again and make changes and make it work a lot better, but immediately after is not the time to try and do it. Give yourself that week off. Give yourself a bit of TLC. See if you want to loop back to it, and you don't have to. Not all games have to be rerun. It's okay to go, actually, having seen it live, I don't think that really works as a mega game. And I'm of the belief that mega games are fundamentally untestable. You absolutely should test beforehand. And the number one piece of advice on how to avoid this happening and how to avoid arriving in this situation is just keep testing stuff, because it's so much better to fail out in a test session than it is actually live at your game. All of that being said, mega games are such complex systems, I don't think they can be properly tested. You can test elements in isolation, but the first test of a mega game is when it's run. And it's okay to look at it afterwards and think, actually, I don't think that works. And sort of related to the looking for the diamonds point, you have learned. Whatever happened on the day, you have learned. And even if you've learned that was a terrible mechanic and that you should never use it again, you come out of it now with a lot more experience of having actually put on your game and actually knowing what it's like. And I've mentioned before about spreading the load. If I'm feeling down after a game, this is a little bit snobby, but I'm only really interested in talking to people that have put on a game, because there isn't a substitute for it. You don't get it until you've done it. Even if you've been to loads, even if you've controlled lots, I don't think you get it until you've actually done a game. And so even if this was your first game and it went poorly, you've learned a heck of a lot. And if you do choose to come back round again and run a second game, you will have all of that experience to draw upon, and it will make your second game better. And then I mentioned it before, but it's important enough to hammer it home again: plan, test, prepare. There's no other way, there's no better way to avoid ending up in a mess. Make sure that your prep is done on time, that all of your components are ready a week before, that you're not stuck cutting bits out on the day of the game, because that doesn't support you in having a good experience on the day. It's going to be stressful for you. Test your mechanics, find the failure points. When I ran my game that I designed from scratch, Shot Heard Around the Universe, I had a great mechanic based on Galaxy Truckers, which was basically about kind of ship design, and players were going to design their naval units and take them out and kind of test them against each other. But that didn't work in any way because it just didn't fit with the story that I was trying to tell with the game. It's a cool mechanic, just doesn't work. It's irrelevant for the scale that Shot is resolved at. And so much better to discover that in a testing session than it is to have discovered that on the day of the game. So that probably felt like a very negative talk. And as I was reviewing my slides, I thought I needed to end with this one. So what is the point? Why bother with all of the whinging that I've just done? Well, after my pretty dreadful experience at my first Urban Nightmare, I did go back to it. That's a photo from Shot Heard Around the Universe, which was 2018. And that's my game. That's my original creation. I realized looking at this photo of me in the background that I might be wearing the same shirt. Or if not, it's a very similar one. So I did go around again, and I did do the Shot Heard Around the Universe, and I also did one leg of the State of Chaos, the mega game with all the connected Urban Nightmare games. And the reason I went around it again is that I am yet to find any kind of game or role-playing experience that does what mega games can do. And I like video games, I like board games, I like various other types of gaming, but I haven't found anything that replicates what mega games can do. And so in that regard, I think the pain is worth it. And it's not as though the pain is unique to mega games either. Anything worth doing well. Anything worth doing is worth doing well. Anything done well is hard. So mega games are a lot of work, and I would encourage designers to go in eyes open about how much work it is, and about the prospect that you might come out of it feeling miserable. But if you do your prep work, the drop will just be the designer drop. And there is a real sense of achievement afterwards as well. And my personal curve now is that I normally feel rancid the day after, but then I'm assuming it went well. I'm up to feeling pretty happy and pretty proud by about day 5. And of the games that I've run, including that first Urban Nightmare, I'm still really glad that I've run them. So what is the point? Mega games are great. I think you already know that, otherwise you wouldn't be at this conference, but they are worth all the pain and hassle. So yeah, thanks for listening, everyone. I think I saw some questions pinging at the end there. Chris, have we got any to?
Yeah, it's not so much questions and more people agreeing with you, I think. Very much agreeing along the lines of what you said. So Kevin said, one of my first games I ran a week before Christmas, and that was a huge mistake. I put all his efforts into the game and had to drop afterwards, and had to do all his holiday prep in like 2 days. So yeah, but generally there's a lot of folks saying that, yeah, agree with you, like avoiding the feedback for like a week is a very good idea. Becky said that she probably didn't ever receive the actual feedback directly from Pennine Mega Games, but had the sort of aggregate feedback, which was very good. To sort of summary. So yeah, overall a lot of things agreement basically. And one thing that Ed has said is, what it's worth, a big part of getting over the sort of designer drop for him is seeing the Facebook posts and the write-ups after the game is run. And the moral of the story being that if we want to see more mega games being run, taking the time to thank the designer and share their own experiences, only if it's a paragraph or on Facebook or similar, is a really effective way to keep people motivated, to keep designers motivated.
Yeah, I'd really echo that. I absolutely love reading AARs of my games, and I think players enjoy reading them as well. But yeah, if you wanted a really simple way to say thank you to a designer for a game you really enjoyed, an AAR, or just putting your photos up and what you enjoyed about it on Facebook, is a great little dopamine hit to keep us going thereafter.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Jim says, I'm stunned at this. Apparently, famously in the 1980s, Andy Granger used to go on holiday for the week before his mega game, and then I guess run it when he came back. And what do you think? Do you think that's a good idea?
I'll have to clarify what you mean by that one, Jim. So in terms of taking holiday before your game so that you've got free time to finish it, 100%, yeah, great plan. I personally always take a couple of days off beforehand, which, in spite of all of my preaching here, I usually spend dashing around getting last minute counters made. But it means that I do at least have the time to do that and then go to sleep at a sensible time on the night before the game. If you mean that, no, he went to France.
Yeah, he went to France, yeah.
I mean, that man, balls of steel. I could not imagine actually going and completely checking off to that degree, but it would force you to actually do it the week before, as I said. So yeah, if you're feeling that confident.
For sure, that's supreme confidence. Johan said that sharing the load has been absolutely essential for him. As a game control, he now does conducting or directing the game rather than playing the instruments of his own doing. So doing the gaffer, the lighting, the cameras and sound. So he's actually obviously more directing his control team, I guess.
I see one there, Jacob Hamilton. How do I respond to a designer who actively asks for feedback directly after a game? Should be mostly positive and wait for honesty for the forms. That would be my suggestion, yeah. And you'll get to modulate this, as you go along. If you've been to a group for a while and that designer, you'll probably have some sense of where they sit. But I would just encourage you to smooth the corners, essentially. Because sometimes I feel like designers asking for feedback is a bit like a drug addict asking for the next hit, in that it might not actually be the best thing for us in the long term. Yeah, I think it's possible to, if they're asking for it directly, I think it's totally possible to say, yeah, I really enjoyed it. This bit was a bit sticky, but I really enjoyed X, Y, Z, and then dismantle the sticky bit a little bit further on your feedback form.
Yeah, fair enough. Got one from here from Pete. He said, and he knows that Becky and yourself are the true Mega Game power couple. But if you're comfortable talking about it, he's interested to hear how you guys support each other if things do go wrong.
I mean, to some extent, it's just like anything in a relationship, really. We've been fortunate in that I don't think, although I felt that the first Urban Nightmare was a bomb, I don't think either of us had a game that sort of in the cold, hard light of day we felt has been a bomb. In terms of how we support each other, it's mainly probably the simplest and most identifiable one is that in the run up to a game, the other one of us, whichever's not lead designer, takes up a lot of the slack just on basic house bits. So, just doing more of the cooking, making sure the washing keeps happening, which is all deeply unexciting. But when a person's dashing around stressing about that, you almost just want to know that, the rest of it just happens out of sight and you can make that happen. And that's a big help for someone. And the other thing is trying to knock the person out of spins. And maybe this is specific to us, but Becky will sometimes basically get herself into a spin where there's lots to do and she can't really make progress on any of it because she's stressing about all the things that there are to do. And it's sometimes, just knocking her out of that spin and sort of sitting there and saying, look, what needs to be done, which she knows. So what needs to be done first, which she knows, but just, getting her to spell it out essentially, and then steering her so that she actually starts accomplishing on one task instead of fretting about all the ones that there are to be done.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes it's a third party coming in and sort of pointing out step-by-step process, as it were. Really does help.
Yeah.
Jim said, I remember being accosted in a pub after a Meg game by a player who proceeded to explain all the shortcomings in detail. And remember, there is a difference between this didn't work for the game for game design reasons, and this didn't work because I did not win. Have you experienced that, Tim? Anybody come up to the pub and explained why all your shortcomings as a designer?
So not in the pub, but what I have had afterwards was a call out from a player who had a bad day on Facebook, essentially. And they posted on the Facebook event for the game. It wasn't in the manner as Jim's describing there as the personal attack. She posted at length that she hadn't enjoyed a game and she felt that the dice were stacked against her, and that the bit that particularly struck for me was that she felt she'd been picked out and persecuted as a new player, which I didn't think at the time, and I still don't now feel was an accurate summation of events. I 100% made some design decisions that could have led her to feel that way. Essentially, she was one of few players that could be directly targeted by assassination on my espionage board, but it was a failure of design insofar as I put that there expecting it to be a very hard to do, very rare thing. and it did actually get rammed through 3 times in the game. So I can understand why she felt bruised about it. And the feedback itself is entirely legit, and I would change it for any subsequent runs. But the part that I didn't appreciate was the forum, essentially, because it's a Facebook post on the game event, and it wound up dragging in lots of other players, some of them answering perceived charges that, they'd been picking on her, so on and so forth. Some of them chiming in that they agreed, some of them they didn't. And I just don't think it's a particularly productive or healthy way of doing it. I think the feedback itself was fair enough, but the method of approach was not as it should be. And I think that's the analogy that I draw with Jim's point there. It does sound like that feedback was crossing the line anyway, but the pub after the game is decidedly not where you get that done. I think it's worth, in terms of the feedback, if you are doing physical feedback forms, it probably is worth you suggesting where feedback ought to go in an email after the game, if people do have chips on the shoulders, because for all I discover is chip on the shoulder there's often genuine valuable feedback in there. It's just about channeling it down some appropriate route.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, get the gems out of it.
Yeah,
definitely. One comment here from Ed. Please, can we see the Galaxy truck as mechanic in a future game? And if so, what is that game going to be?
Maybe. It needs to be a game essentially that's all about building your fleets and having them fight each other, and getting your fleet destroyed and building a new one and seeing how that does, which was in no way appropriate for Shot, because it was supposed to be that sort of a decisive battle that wrecked your fleet would probably lose you the game. And only having one iteration through the system was not really the way forward.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, there doesn't appear to be any more questions, so I might end it on Jim's comment of, as probably many designers can appreciate this, he can give up the feedback at any time. Just he only does it to be sociable.
Yeah.
But yeah, so any final comments there, Tim? It was an excellent presentation. Thank you.
I hope it's useful to people, and particularly if you're thinking about running your first game. I hope I haven't dissuaded you. It's very much a be aware that, it may be rough at times psychologically, as any big project that you take on, to be honest, but it's absolutely worth doing. And as I say, I haven't found anything that replicates what Mega Games can do, so give it a go.
Excellent, thank you. And yeah, so everybody who's on the call now, if you want to join us in 2:15, we've got the narrative and stories panel coming up, so that should be excellent as well. But yeah, thank you very much, Tim. Very much appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
See you later.